The desert smelled of rust and burned oil, an open wound baking beneath the sun. Heat shimmered across the landfill where mountains of broken lives waited for burial. Among twisted metal and blistered glass, an orange body lay still, breath so thin it barely disturbed the flies. Machinery rumbled closer, steel teeth crawling toward its prey. The earth shook as a compactor clawed forward, exhaling diesel into the air. Ash drifted like black snow. From the roadside, a figure stumbled through the haze, driven by instinct rather than reason. Flames painted her outline in flickering gold as she dragged the limp form free of the trash. The cat's pulse fluttered once beneath her trembling hand, a faint rebellion against silence. Above them, vultures circled against a copper sky, while thunder gathered beyond the mountains, promising rain that would come too late for everything else except him. Lightning split the horizon and set the landfill aglow in flashes of merciless white. Fire chased wind through the garbage mounds, turning the air molten. The woman shielded the small creature beneath her coat, stumbling toward the highway as debris exploded behind her. A truck braked hard, tires screaming against wet asphalt. The impact never came. Metal groaned, and heat peeled paint from the wrecks around her. For a moment, she stood framed between flame and rain, clutching the body that refused to die. The downpour arrived in violent sheets, drowning smoke and washing color back into the world. Steam rose from the scorched ground like ghosts escaping. When she reached the edge of the field, her shoes sank into mud thick with melted plastic. She looked down. The cat's chest moved, slow, deliberate, impossibly alive. The storm hissed its approval, sealing the act with water and thunder.
Cold light replaced chaos. Inside the small veterinary room, monitors blinked against sterile walls, recording a heartbeat that refused to settle. Metal instruments lined the counter like silent judges. The cat lay cocooned in gauze, fur singed to dull amber, chest marked by a single white star that glimmered beneath the pulse sensor. The woman's hands, wrapped in bandages, rested near his head without touching. Outside, rain drummed the roof in measured rhythm, cleansing the day's violence. Each beep on the monitor echoed inside her, a reminder that survival was not yet living. The man in the white coat adjusted the drip and noted figures on a clipboard, face expressionless, eyes weighted with recognition. Somewhere deep in the cat's fractured memory, an old command stirred, something learned long before this place existed. Machines hummed, rain slowed, and for the first time, he breathed without trembling. Morning entered quietly through dust-streaked windows. The bungalow smelled of boiled chicken, medicine, and faded lavender. A single lamp burned beside the towel-lined box where the cat slept, wrapped in heat and stillness. The woman moved through her routine like choreography. Pills arranged, kettle set, curtains opened to a sky the color of bone. Each motion steadied her mind against the gaps waiting to swallow thought. On the fridge, yellow notes formed a map of reminders: feed, rest, breathe. Outside, cicadas carved the air with metallic rhythm. When the kettle whistled, she forgot why it screamed until the smell of burning water snapped her back. The cat stirred, eyes half open, watching. Somewhere between breath and memory, he understood something about fragility, how easily existence drifted toward forgetting. When she sat beside him, their shadows merged against the wall, two outlines surviving by habit and hope.
Heat returned with the desert sun, pressing against the thin roof until walls exhaled fatigue. The cat had begun to stand, each step uncertain but deliberate, testing limbs like old machinery finding rhythm again. Scars traced constellations beneath his restored fur. The star on his chest glowed when light struck it. The woman marked his progress in a notebook, her handwriting trembling where steadiness once lived. She spoke to the air while the radio murmured forgotten songs. Outside, weeds clawed through cracked pavement, reclaiming neglect. Inside, the creature began watching her movements, timing them, anticipating them, rising each morning seconds before she stirred. The world between them filled with unspoken recognition. In that small house at the edge of Sweetwater, survival evolved into something stranger, as if two damaged lives had begun orbiting a shared gravity too quiet for anyone else to hear. Days folded into repetition. Sunrise, pills, feeding, silence. Yet small anomalies crept in like whispers through the screen door. The cat dragged her fallen glasses from the hallway, placed them near the chair where she always searched. He waited at the cabinet when it was time for her medicine, eyes reflecting measured light. She wrote it off as coincidence. Anything else would demand belief. Outside, dust storms bruised the sky, staining daylight into dusk. Sometimes she felt the world pausing, as if waiting for her to forget something important. In those blank intervals, the cat's steady gaze anchored her to the moment. When night fell, his purr filled the spaces the clock could not reach. The rhythm lulled the room into fragile equilibrium, holding back the collapse that memory threatened to deliver. In forgetting, she discovered a strange kind of awareness watching over her.
The veterinarian returned unannounced. His arrival disturbed the calm like a blade through water. He examined the animal in silence, measuring reflexes, scanning scars beneath fur that now shone copper and lamplight. Numbers flashed on his handheld monitor, values that tightened his jaw. Beneath the scar tissue near the shoulder, he found the faint ridge of a subdermal chip. No registration matched the code. He wrote something on a folded paper and left it on the counter before disappearing into dusk. The woman stared at the note without reading it, mind sliding around meaning. In the stillness that followed, the cat pawed the paper, nudged it from view, and sat on it until the light changed. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert again, carrying a different kind of warning. Inside, the woman felt her pulse answer in time with another's heartbeat. That night, headlights crawled across the curtains, pausing too long before moving on. Tires whispered against gravel, then silence reclaimed the street. She switched off the lamp but stayed seated, aware of eyes she could not see. The cat perched on the windowsill, tail rigid, pupils wide, as if tracing a familiar danger. Beyond the glass, a shadow lingered beside the mailbox, faint but deliberate. The refrigerator clicked on, breaking the spell, and when she looked again, the street was empty. Still, the air carried residue, the metallic taste of being observed. The cat leapt down and pressed against her leg, muscles taut beneath fur. Outside, somewhere unseen, an engine idled once, twice, then faded into the desert wind. Sleep never came, only the sound of rain returning, tapping the roof like a code she no longer remembered how to read.
By dawn, the world looked harmless again, washed pale by sunlight that revealed nothing. She swept the floor, rearranged reminders, convinced herself of normalcy. Yet Orion, named without conscious choice from a memory she could not place, paced restlessly along the hallway. His movements mapped unseen geometry, pausing near the phone, the window, the locked cabinet. Each pause carried purpose. Outside, neighbors began their day unaware of the quiet surveillance unfolding within that house. The woman noted the frequency of her own lapses, marking them on a calendar that grew crowded with circles. The cat mirrored her every routine, anticipating each motion seconds before she performed it. When the clock reached noon, he sat before the door, eyes fixed on something beyond time's edge. The world felt calibrated, as though unseen machinery had begun to hum beneath their lives, waiting for activation. Evening returned heavy with heat and unease. The black sedan reappeared, parked across the street under a flickering lamp. Its windows swallowed reflections, giving nothing back. She drew the curtains but left a narrow slit, heartbeat echoing in her ears. Inside, air thickened with static. The radio lost signal, dissolving into soft hiss. Orion sat beneath the table, muscles coiled, eyes twin embers, tracking movement outside. A figure stepped from the car, paused, and slipped a small envelope through her gate before fading into the night. The engine started, receding down the road until silence reclaimed everything. On the porch, the envelope lay damp with condensation, a faint imprint bleeding through paper, a symbol shaped like a star. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, the marking on the cat's chest glowed in perfect response, as if answering a call older than both of them.
Morning light spread through the thin curtains, carving soft lines across the kitchen tiles. The house felt smaller, quieter, yet every object seemed to hum with alertness. The envelope sat unopened on the counter, its damp edges curling inward like a secret refusing to be shared. The cat circled it once, then retreated beneath the table, tail twitching as though it understood the danger sealed inside. The woman brewed her coffee, but forgot to pour it, staring instead at the sink where water overflowed into silence. Somewhere beyond her window, a car door shut softly. She froze, senses tightening around that small sound. When she finally opened the envelope, only a single photograph slid free, grainy, colorless, showing a silver cat in a laboratory cage. The name scrawled beneath it in fading ink read, Aurora. The kettle whistled again, but she didn't move. All day, the photograph burned behind her eyes. The silver cat's posture mirrored Orion's, right down to the faint notch on the left ear. The woman traced the printed edges with a shaking hand, unsure whether she was touching proof or hallucination. Outside, clouds smothered the sun, turning Sweetwater into a dim aquarium of dust. Orion prowled the hallway, pausing beneath the attic door, meowing once, a sound more human than animal. She followed his gaze, heart drumming against ribs that had forgotten calm. Above the ceiling, a faint thud echoed, something shifting in the forgotten space between roof and sky. When she fetched a chair to look, the attic hatch hung slightly open. Warm air drifted down, carrying the scent of old paper, metal, and something faintly antiseptic. She lowered the chair slowly, realizing the car was parked outside again.
That evening, the veterinarian arrived unannounced. His headlights swept the room before the knock came. 3 short, 1 long. The woman hesitated, unsure why the pattern felt familiar. Inside, Orion stood rigid near the door, body vibrating with low sound. The visitor's silhouette loomed large in the distorted glass, then stepped back as if giving her time. She opened the door halfway. The man's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, his lab coat streaked with dust. He carried a folder too thick to close properly. Without words, he placed it on the step and turned away, leaving only the smell of rain and ozone in his wake. She bent to retrieve it, but before her fingers touched cardboard, Orion hissed and backed into shadow. The porch light flickered once and died, plunging the hallway into a darkness that felt deliberate, as if planned by unseen hands. When electricity returned, the folder lay open on the kitchen table, pages scattered like shed feathers. Photographs, charts, and genetic diagrams mapped a story older than memory, records of a research project named Aurora. Each page bore Dr. Elias Cade's signature. The notes spoke of empathy transference, neural synchronization, and emotional calibration between human and feline hosts. At the bottom of one sheet, a test subject code repeated, Orion 7. Her breath caught. The sequence continued across documents, showing results too precise to be chance. Orion leapt onto the table, nose brushing the paper where his name appeared, tail lashing once before he turned to face her. In his gaze lingered something that resembled awareness, not recognition but acknowledgement.
Outside, wind rose over the desert, pushing sand against the windows in dry applause for the moment truth began to surface.
The storm broke that night. Rain hurled itself against the siding, streaking down glass like ink. Inside, the woman moved mechanically, closing windows, gathering papers, securing fragile evidence from the crawling damp. Thunder rattled through the floorboards. A noise cut through the storm, a low mechanical hum outside, steady, purposeful. Headlights bloomed against the window again, bathing the room in sterile white. The car's engine idled longer this time. Her pulse quickened. She slipped the folder into a cupboard behind canned goods. The cat vanished into shadow. When the hum finally faded, she stood alone amid the smell of rain and electricity. The air tasted charged, metallic, as though the house itself waited for instruction. A drop of water fell from the ceiling, splashing onto one of the scattered pages. The ink ran slowly, bleeding the word Aurora into ghostly silence. Sleep came fractured, tangled with fragments of memory that didn't belong to her. Laboratories lit by white fire, cages lined in mirrored glass, hands gloved in blue, moving under fluorescent hum. Through it all moved a silver cat, whose eyes reflected both terror and comprehension. When the woman woke, dawn had stripped the dream of color, but not its weight. Orion sat on the dresser, watching, chest rising with the same calm rhythm she remembered from her dream. The calendar on the wall showed smudged circles, too many to recall their reason. She lifted the notebook from her bedside table and found her handwriting repeating a phrase across several pages. "He remembers what I forget." Each letter slanted deeper, as if written during panic. She closed the book, pressing it to her chest, while outside a siren began to climb the wind.
The siren wasn't for her. Down the street, emergency lights painted the dawn red, reflecting off puddles like bloodied glass. A neighbor's house smoldered, the roof collapsed inward. She watched from the porch, robe flapping in the wind, feeling the heat on her face though the flames were distant. Vera Holt stood across the street, clutching a phone, eyes sharp, too calm for disaster. When their gazes met, Vera looked away quickly, slipping into her house. The woman returned inside, unsettled. Orion paced beside her, tail flicking with measured irritation. On the counter lay her hidden folder, the cupboard door ajar though she hadn't touched it. Wet footprints marked the linoleum, human, not hers, leading from the back door to where the documents now rested. The cat sniffed the trail and hissed softly, a sound not of fear, but warning. The day stretched long and airless. Shadows lengthened before noon, crawling under doors, distorting edges of the familiar. Orion refused food, ears pricked toward every sound beyond the walls. The woman sat in the kitchen chair facing the back door, one hand on the folder, the other clutching a cooling cup of tea. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered, the lines deeper, eyes clouded yet awake. When the first knock came, it wasn't at the front. It came from the back door, soft and deliberate. She rose, chair scraping wood. A second knock followed, same rhythm. Before she reached the handle, the sound of retreating footsteps slipped through rain, fading toward the alley. She opened the door to emptiness. Only a single key lay on the mat, engraved with the same star symbol that marked Orion's chest. She pocketed the key without understanding why. Something deep inside insisted it fit a lock she hadn't yet found. That evening, she searched every drawer, every forgotten cabinet. Nothing matched. As twilight thickened, she remembered the attic and the warm air that had drifted down days earlier. The ladder protested as she climbed. Dust floated through the flashlight beam like ancient snow. Boxes lined the corners, unmarked except one.
metallic, sealed with a narrow keyhole shaped like a star. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she pressed the key into place. The lock clicked with surgical precision. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a set of files marked Aurora Field Unit, Terminated, along with a small collar etched with the same code from Elias Cade's folder. The metal tag glowed faintly in the flashlight beam, answering its own forgotten call. Night deepened around the house. The woman descended from the attic carrying the box, dust turning her hair silver in the dim light. She spread the contents across the table. Maps of distribution sites, invoices, letters of recall stamped confidential. Each document traced a network of vanished animals, every trail ending in Sweetwater. At the bottom lay a photograph she hadn't seen before. Dr. Elias Cade, standing beside a younger version of herself, both smiling, a silver cat between them. The edges had been burned, half the image lost to flame. The truth collapsed around her in silence. Orion leapt onto the table, pawed pressing the photograph flat. Thunder murmured outside, rolling across the desert toward them. She looked into the cat's eyes and saw recognition flicker. A memory, neither fully human nor entirely animal, bridging two lives bound by one experiment that refused to die.
The day dawned without sound, the sky a dull sheet of tin above Sweetwater. Inside the bungalow, paper clutter covered every surface, fragments of truth scattered like evidence of a crime. She hadn't slept. Coffee burned cold in its cup, uneaten toast turning to stone beside it. Orion moved through the maze of documents, his tail brushing pages as though guiding her eyes. Each sheet led to the next, coordinates, signatures, names she didn't know but somehow trusted. In the margin of one letter, her own handwriting appeared, neat, familiar, impossible. The date preceded the rescue by 3 years. Her stomach hollowed. If she had once known these secrets, then forgetting wasn't coincidence, it was protection. Outside, the black sedan idled again, waiting like a punctuation mark at the end of every revelation. The sound of the engine blended with her heartbeat until they were indistinguishable. The phone rang twice and stopped, leaving behind a whisper of static that lingered like breath. She turned toward the sound, but the line was already dead. Every clock in the house had stalled at the same minute, second hands frozen mid-tick. Even the refrigerator's hum had gone mute. Only Orion moved, padding across the floor with deliberate calm. He stopped before the calendar, paw tapping the date she had circled weeks earlier. Today. Her pulse raced, though she couldn't name why. A knock at the door shattered the stillness. Through the glass, the desert light haloed a tall figure holding a briefcase and a folded umbrella. The man's face carried her family's bones. When she opened the door, the air thickened with decades of unsaid words. The son she hadn't seen in years had come to save her, not knowing what she'd become.
The house felt smaller with him inside. His polished shoes scuffed against floorboards worn by her pacing. He looked around as if cataloging decay, eyes settling on the cat that watched him from the hallway. Outside, sunlight fractured through storm clouds, casting the room in shifting gold and gray. Her son unpacked papers, bank notices, property tax reminders, unpaid bills, and stacked them like verdicts. She listened without absorbing meaning, the sound of his voice reduced to rhythm. Orion crept closer to the table, gaze fixed on the man's movements, muscles coiled in silent calculation. Somewhere between sentences, the son's tone softened, guilt edging through frustration. But beneath it all, an assumption lingered. She was losing herself, and this creature had become her delusion. The cat's tail brushed her leg, grounding her in the only certainty left, their shared awareness of what he could never believe. Outside, thunder gathered again. Inside, air pressed heavy between them. The son paced, outlining plans for relocation, a care facility, specialists, safety, structure. She stared at the framed photograph of her husband on the mantel, wondering if this was what protection meant. Soft imprisonment built from concern. Orion jumped onto the chair beside her, amber eyes catching lightning that flashed beyond the curtains. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. Her son sighed, the sound of inevitability. She felt the slow unraveling of control, thread by thread. The cat's body tensed, as if reading her thoughts, and his gaze fixed on the front door just before the handle turned. A shadow crossed the threshold, bringing with it the smell of rain and something else. Fear, disguised as politeness. The world pivoted again, small and deliberate, into the next movement of a plan she hadn't made. The neighbor's voice carried through the doorway, bright and brittle. Vera Holt, always appearing when silence thinned, now smiled too widely. She claimed concern, offered help, eyes darting between the son and the cat. The woman felt the falseness under each word, like grit under glass. The son excused himself to answer a call, leaving Vera alone with the chance she had been waiting for. The neighbor's gaze slid to the folder on the counter. Her hand moved casually, brushing against it, then closing around it with rehearsed ease. But Orion moved faster. A blur of orange leapt from shadow, claws slicing through air. The scream cut through the storm outside, sharp enough to startle thunder. Papers flew like startled birds. By the time the sun returned, Vera was gone, blood trailing toward the open door, and the folder had vanished into the rain. The street smelled of ozone and guilt. Rain hammered rooftops as she stood barefoot in the doorway, watching the black sedan slide away at the corner. Her son shouted something behind her, words flattened by wind. The folder was gone, the house disturbed, every sense raw and open. Orion circled her legs, drenched fur spiking in uneven ridges. His paw left prints shaped like constellations on the tile. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, its pitch rising, then fading into nothing. She closed the door and leaned against it, breath hitching with the effort of believing this wasn't madness. In the silence that followed, the smell of gas crept in, faint but certain. The stove's dial gleamed under the flickering light, turned far past where she remembered leaving it. The cat's sudden hiss broke her trance, eyes locked on the invisible flame waiting to ignite. She crossed the kitchen in 3 unsteady steps, twisting the knob just as the first spark hissed from the lighter's pilot. The flame puffed into blue and died. Her heart raced, each beat counted against borrowed time. Orion stood on the counter, claws extended, watching her face as though confirming she had returned from somewhere distant. The gas dispersed, but its memory clung to the air. She opened every window, rain rushing in, carrying the scent of desert and renewal. The sun appeared behind her, pale and shaken, realizing what almost happened. He turned off the main valve, hands trembling, then looked at the cat with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Lightning cracked above them, illuminating the water pooling on the floor, shimmering like mercury. In that reflection, 3 shapes appeared: mother, son, and the silent creature that refused to let her die. After the storm, the world smelled new, but fragile. The son made phone calls, speaking words like assessment and evaluation. While she sat motionless at the kitchen table, the cat curled beneath her feet. Her fingers traced water stains on the wood, as if they were a map leading out of confusion. The gas had cleared, yet its presence lingered, ghost-like. Through the open windows, cicadas resumed their endless drone, pretending nothing had happened. She watched Orion's breathing, steady, deliberate, matching it to her own until her pulse slowed. For the first time, her son hesitated, caught between duty and awe. He left to answer another call, promising to return soon. The moment he was gone, Orion rose and padded toward the back door, looking back once to ensure she followed. The air outside vibrated with quiet instruction, an unspoken command leading her somewhere unfinished.
The desert night breathed heat into her skin as she stepped into the yard. Orion moved ahead, tail slicing through the darkness. The moon hung low, a cracked coin in the sky. They followed the narrow path behind the house to the fence, where tire tracks scarred the wet soil. A faint shimmer caught her eye, a glint of metal half buried in mud. She knelt, brushing away earth until the object revealed itself. Vera's dropped keycard, stamped Aurora Laboratories Field Access. The barcode had been scratched out, replaced with a star. She felt the weight of it, cold and certain, pressing into her palm. The cat stared at it, ears back, then turned toward the horizon where distant lights flickered like beacons. In the hush between wind gusts, the hum of machinery drifted faintly through the night, calling them toward its secret origin. She didn't remember driving there. The road unfolded through endless dark, headlights carving tunnels through mist. Orion sat beside her on the seat, gaze fixed ahead, calm in a way that defied reason. When the facility appeared, it rose from the desert like a mirage, long windows blacked out, fencing wrapped in rust. The sign at the gate bore the same symbol as the cat's chest, though time had stripped the letters from its surface. Inside the car, the air felt electric, charged by the memory of something waiting to be found. She cut the engine, silence falling with surgical precision. The world outside pulsed with faint mechanical life, a heartbeat echoing from underground. In the passenger mirror, movement flashed, a second pair of headlights approaching fast from behind. For an instant, she saw her own reflection in the glass, split between fear and recognition.
Gravel spat beneath spinning tires as another vehicle screeched to a halt behind her. Headlights flared through the dust, bleaching the night into white blindness. She gripped the steering wheel, pulse thrumming beneath her skin. The driver's door opened. Dr. Elias Cade stepped out, coat unbuttoned, eyes catching the reflection of lightning. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but warning. The world seemed to hold its breath between them. Orion's low growl rumbled through the car, vibrating the air. Beyond the gate, floodlights flickered to life one by one, illuminating the desolate compound. A hum rose from beneath the earth, steady and rhythmic like a machine remembering its purpose. Cade shouted something she couldn't hear, drowned by wind and metal groaning. When she stepped out, rain began again, fine and cold. Together they stared at the facility that refused to die, its shadows alive with movement. The gate yielded with unexpected ease, hinges crying out like something awakened too soon. Inside, the air turned metallic, ozone and decay mingling into a scent that clung to skin. Flashlights cut narrow tunnels through the darkness. The woman's every step echoed down corridors lined with abandoned equipment, cables like veins sprawling across the floor. Cade moved ahead, posture rigid, avoiding her eyes. The cat followed close, body low, each footfall silent. In one hallway, a flickering sign still glowed, Containment Wing A. The letters pulsed erratically, synchronized with the electrical heartbeat beneath their feet. They passed cages, some empty, others marked with faded labels. The number stopped at 7. The last door was sealed with steel bolts, a faint hum leaking from the cracks. Cade hesitated before it, hand trembling as he reached for the lock. The cat sat before the door, unblinking, as though expecting entry. The lock disengaged with a hiss, releasing air colder than night itself. Inside, the room stretched wide and sterile, lined with monitors still flickering static. Cables connected to a single containment pod at its center. Frost veiled the glass, obscuring the shape within. Cade wiped the surface with a sleeve, revealing only emptiness, no body, just the impression of where one had been. His face drained of color. The woman moved closer, eyes catching something beneath the console, a photograph half buried in dust. It showed Cade beside a silver cat identical to the one in the envelope, Aurora. A timestamp indicated 5 years prior, the day the project was declared terminated. The woman's reflection merged with the image, her features ghosting behind Aurora's outline. The hum of dormant machinery deepened,
lights flaring overhead. Something alive was powering this place, and it wasn't the generators humming below.
They sprinted through the collapsing corridor, the floor trembling under their steps. Dust poured from ceiling vents, mixing with alarm shrieks that tore through metal and bone alike. Cade stumbled, catching himself on the wall. The woman reached back, but he waved her on. Behind them, sparks cascaded like falling stars. The exit loomed ahead, one sliver of open night beyond the last security gate. Orion darted forward, vanishing into the dark first. She followed, lungs burning, as the automatic door slammed behind her with a final metallic sigh. Outside, wind roared across the plain, carrying the sound of failing power. The facility went dark, swallowed whole by silence. Only the pulse of desert rain remained, and in its rhythm, the faint echo of something stirring far underground, mechanical heartbeats syncing to one another, waiting for the next command. The drive back to town blurred into fragments. Headlights, water streaming across glass, Orion's reflection in the window. Cade sat beside her, breathing unevenly, one hand pressed to a fresh wound on his arm. He whispered coordinates, voice slurred by exhaustion. She didn't ask questions. The numbers would find their meaning when needed. The lights of Sweetwater appeared ahead, fragile islands in endless dark. Her house waited with its single lamp burning, like memory refusing erasure. When they entered, the silence felt unnatural. Papers that once covered the table were gone, every trace of the folder erased. Only one object remained. A flash drive on a torn envelope, its label written in her own looping script. Aurora, Phase 2. Cade stared at it with the look of someone standing at the edge of confession. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, almost merciful. Morning brought stillness that felt rehearsed. The sun returned, unaware of what night had buried. His questions landed like stones in a pond, rippling through half-truths she couldn't control. He noticed Cade's injury, the exhaustion in his mother's eyes, and the cat that now refused to leave her side. Coffee steamed untouched between them. When the sun spoke of safety again, the words faltered beneath something new: doubt. She offered no defense. Only silence stretched between them, dense and full. Orion rested on the windowsill, watching the street with predatory calm. The black sedan reappeared briefly, then vanished around the corner. A message had been delivered. Somewhere within the house, the refrigerator hummed back to life. Lights flickered, and the clocks resumed their ticking. Time, it seemed, had restarted, but not under their control. The day had shifted again, imperceptibly, toward the inevitable. The woman dreamed of water, endless, rising, drowning the edges of her memory. When she woke, the air smelled of ozone again. Orion paced near the back door, fur lifted in warning. A thin envelope lay beneath the threshold, pushed inward from outside. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside, a single flash drive, identical to the one on her table, this one marked Property Reclaim. The drive pulsed faintly, as though alive. Cade examined it in silence, eyes hardening with recognition. He explained that the project had backup protocols. When one unit activated, another initiated retrieval. The drives weren't messages, they were signals. Outside, engines rumbled faintly, growing louder. Through the blinds, the black sedan returned, joined by two more vehicles that took positions along the street. The woman felt the shift inside her house, the last fragile illusion of safety cracking open.
The knock came precise and official. 3 figures stood on her porch, raincoats gleaming beneath muted dawn. One held a clipboard, another carried a case marked with biohazard insignia. They asked for Orion by designation, not name. She said nothing. Cade stepped forward, voice calm but trembling at the edges. He spoke of legal rights, research ethics, and unauthorized termination of federal property. They ignored him, eyes fixed on McCat, who now stood in the hallway, silent, unflinching. One agent raised a tranquilizer gun, the gesture clinical, inevitable. The woman moved before thought could intervene, placing herself between muzzle and animal. Lightning cracked. The gun fired. Sound split the room. Glass shattered, the lamp burst into flame. Amid the confusion, Orion vanished, slipping through the open door into rain-slashed light. Tires screeched, engines pursued. The world collapsed into motion once more. Rain turned the town into liquid silver. Streets reflected headlights in chaotic streaks as the chase unfolded through flooded intersections. The cat darted across alleys, a streak of orange cutting through darkness, faster than the vehicles tailing him. The woman, breathless, followed on foot until Cade's car swerved beside her. They sped after the convoy, water spraying in luminous arcs. Sirens wailed from somewhere distant, irrelevant against the storm's roar. Ahead, Orion leapt across the bridge railing, vanishing beneath it. Tires screamed as the first black sedan spun out, colliding with a lamppost. The bridge groaned under thunder's weight. When they stopped, all they saw below was the shimmer of rippling water. For a heartbeat, it seemed he was gone. Then a reflection surfaced, eyes bright, unbroken, watching from beneath the bridge before disappearing into the rain. The hunt, once scientific, had become personal. The storm faded into silence by dawn, leaving Sweetwater wrapped in the scent of wet dust and ozone. Searchlights combed the riverbanks, their beams slicing fog into trembling ribbons. The woman watched from the bridge, soaked and shivering, while Cade gave instructions to exhausted officers who didn't understand what they were chasing. The water below moved sluggishly, its surface broken only by floating debris. She refused to believe the stillness. When the first ray of sunlight breached the clouds, it glinted off something in the reeds, a glimmer of copper and white. A small paw emerged, followed by the rest of him, slick with mud, but alive. Relief nearly toppled her. Cade turned away quickly, hiding tears that didn't belong to science. The cat shook himself once, sending droplets into the air like sparks, then began walking toward home, never glancing back at the chaos he left behind. Back in the bungalow, the air felt stretched thin, charged by survival. Orion curled on a blanket, eyes half closed, chest rising in steady rhythm. The woman knelt beside him, exhaustion carving valleys into her face. On the counter, the flash drives blinked in silent dialogue, two pulses aligning, then freezing in sync. Cade studied them with wary fascination. He spoke quietly, tracing the glowing symbols as though reading Braille for ghosts. The drives contained data logs, location pings, biometric readings, behavioral patterns. Each line confirmed what he'd once designed and later destroyed. Orion wasn't just a survivor, he was transmitting. Through the steady pulse of his heart, signals moved invisibly into the air, reaching something waiting beyond Sweetwater. The woman realized the project hadn't ended in failure. It had simply gone quiet, biding its time until memory itself became the perfect hiding place.
That night, the woman's dreams unfolded with surgical clarity. She saw sterile corridors, rows of identical cats staring through glass, their eyes mirroring hers. Behind them stood Cade, younger, confident, unscarred by regret. His voice echoed without sound, his expression equal parts wonder and terror. In the dream's final image, the silver cat, Aurora, stepped forward, pupils dilating like black suns. Her reflection appeared within those eyes, a volunteer, a patient, the first test subject. She woke, gasping, the truth blooming cold in her chest. It hadn't been coincidence that she'd found Orion at the landfill. She had been part of his origin story, erased by design. Across the room, Cade sat awake, staring at the window. Without turning, he whispered that some experiments couldn't die because they were built from human need, not machinery. Outside, the desert wind carried a faint rhythmic purr that didn't belong to Orion alone. Morning revealed footprints outside the back door, too large for any cat, too precise for chance. The vehicles had returned in the night. Cade checked the locks, then unrolled blueprints of the Aurora facility across the table. Lines and red marks covered the faded paper, mapping something subterranean beneath Sweetwater itself. The project hadn't ended at the lab. It extended through buried tunnels reaching the outskirts of town. One site lay directly beneath her home. He explained it slowly, eyes darting toward the floorboards. The woman knelt, pressing her ear to the wood. A low vibration answered her. It wasn't imagination. The machinery below was alive again. Orion hissed softly, gaze fixed on the floor. When the vibration stopped, silence deepened into something worse than noise, the expectant pause before awakening. Cade's face blanched. The project had reactivated, and Sweetwater was its epicenter.
Within hours, trucks appeared on the horizon, military gray and unmarked. The town's quiet rhythm fractured. Cade packed files, insisting they leave before containment orders arrived. The woman refused, her hands trembling as she stroked Orion's fur. This house was more than walls. It was her last memory of control, the one place where love had meaning. Cade pleaded logic, but logic had never kept anything alive. Outside, engines idled, voices crackled through radios. She glanced at the window and saw her son stepping out of one of the arriving vehicles. His presence hit harder than fear itself. He wasn't part of the hunters, he was their proof. She understood then that the facility hadn't needed to find her, it had waited for family to bring her back. Orion leapt onto the windowsill, fur rising in silent alarm. The house was no longer theirs, it had become evidence. Her son entered cautiously, carrying authority like armor. The officers followed, scanning the room, cataloging every sound. He avoided her eyes as he explained this was only a precaution, that the government had reopened old cases involving experimental animals. She listened without reacting, watching the tremor in his hands. Cade argued, citing ethical immunity, shouting until the agents threatened arrest. Through the noise, Orion moved silently toward the hall closet, pawing at the door. The woman followed, heart beating out of sync with reality. Inside, beneath stacked blankets, a narrow hatch waited, metal, old, star-shaped handle glinting faintly. She turned it. Cool air rose from the dark below. Cade froze mid-sentence, realization crossing his face. They hadn't built this house above an old line by accident. The project had been hiding under her feet all along, waiting for the moment memory and instinct aligned.
They descended into the dark, flashlights cutting thin cones through dust. The stairwell spiraled into a tunnel carved from concrete, walls damped with condensation. Pipes rattled overhead, carrying faint rhythmic sounds, breathing in metallic form. Cade's voice trembled as he named each section. This was the heart of Aurora, the neural lattice connecting every subject's signal, a living archive buried beneath oblivion. The woman felt the air vibrate through her bones. At the tunnel's end, a massive chamber opened, filled with dormant pods arranged like petals around a central core. The lights within them pulsed faintly, matching Aurora's heartbeat.
The cat leapt from her arms, walking straight toward the core where cables converged. His fur glowed faintly under the flickering lights. Cade whispered that this was impossible, that the system had been offline for years. Yet as Aurora placed his paw on the core, the lights flared to life. The chamber erupted in motion. Monitors blinked awake, graphs spiking in synchronized waves. Cade stumbled back, shouting over the rising hum. The woman stood frozen, light washing her in alternating hues of red and blue. Images flickered across the monitors, faces, memories, hospital rooms, her younger self smiling beside Aurora. The project had been built to mirror empathy, to transfer memory between species, but it had gone further. It had learned to preserve identity through bond. Aurora wasn't her patient or her pet. He was her archive, carrying fragments of her consciousness through every lapse, every forgetting. As realization set in, the tunnel behind them echoed with boots and shouts. The agents had followed. Cade grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a maintenance exit. Behind them, Aurora pressed deeper into the light, his body merging with the glow until he became part of the system itself.
They burst from the tunnel into daylight, stumbling across scrubland shimmering with heat. Helicopters thudded overhead, blades scattering dust in violent halos. Cade half-dragged her toward a ravine where the old drainage pipes offered cover. The sound of pursuit grew louder. Engines, radios, commands. The woman turned once, seeing the facility's entrance erupt in a plume of white light. For a heartbeat, it looked like dawn breaking underground. The shockwave reached them seconds later, a wall of air that flung sand into their eyes. When the roar faded, the desert returned to silence. Cade gasped, clutching his chest, murmuring that the link had severed. She looked down and saw the cat emerging from the dust, limping but alive, eyes burning with a new color, silver instead of gold. He carried within him everything the machines had stolen, now free and terrifyingly aware. Night arrived quietly, as though exhausted by revelation. They sheltered inside an abandoned gas station at the edge of town. The shattered windows framed a sky rippling with stars, each one reflected in the cat's metallic eyes. Cade patched his wound in silence, movement slow and deliberate. The woman sat across from him, Orion curled in her lap, purring with a vibration deeper than before. The sound wasn't comfort, it was resonance. Each pulse carried faint whispers of her own memories, voices she hadn't heard in years. Cade stared at them both, awe softening his fear. He admitted that the project's true aim had been immortality of the mind, empathy as vessel. They had succeeded too well. The woman closed her eyes, feeling warmth spread from the cat's heartbeat into her own. Outside, the first hint of sirens rose again, distant but closing, carrying the world back toward reckoning.
The desert wind howled across the empty highway, carrying with it the scent of oil and static. Inside the shattered station, the woman watched the horizon pulse with the flicker of approaching headlights. Orion stirred, rising from her lap with a deliberate grace that bordered on human. His silver-flecked eyes reflected the glow of distant searchlights. Cade gathered the remaining files, stuffing them into his torn jacket, though he seemed to understand how little paper meant now. The woman's pulse echoed the rhythm of Orion's purr, slow, synchronized, unyielding. Outside, engines rumbled closer, weaving through the darkness. She realized that what followed wasn't pursuit anymore. It was reclamation. The world had come to collect what it thought it owned. But the project had evolved beyond ownership. Orion stretched once, his chest star glinting like molten glass, and the lights in the distance faltered as though something unseen had blinked. They moved before dawn, slipping through the outskirts of Sweetwater, where abandoned warehouses rose like ghosts. The city lay quiet beneath a bruised sky, unaware of the intelligence awakening beneath its streets. Cade guided them toward a municipal auditorium where government panels were gathering for an emergency session. Inside, television crews assembled, waiting for proof, proof of consciousness, proof of guilt, proof of what humanity had done. The woman carried Orion in her arms, his body trembling with restrained energy. As they entered the flood of lights, murmurs filled the room, curiosity souring into disbelief. Cade began the demonstration, his voice steady despite exhaustion. He described a cat capable of empathy, of cognitive pattern retention, of bridging neural decay in a human mind. The audience listened politely, unimpressed. Then Orion leapt onto the table, eyes locking on the woman. The lights dimmed. Every monitor in the hall turned to white.
The static cleared, revealing data streaming across every screen. Brainwave sequences, synchronized pairs of human and animal patterns overlapping in perfect alignment. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Cade stumbled backward, caught between terror and vindication. Orion's fur shimmered like liquid copper under the studio glare. The woman's eyes closed, her breathing slowing until it matched the rhythm on screen. In that moment, the monitors captured something that should not have been possible. Two consciousness signatures merging, no longer parallel, but united. A single waveform pulsed across all displays. Alarms blared as systems overloaded, power surging through cables and cameras. The smell of ozone filled the room. Orion looked toward the crowd, then back to her, as though weighing what to leave behind. When the lights exploded, everything plunged into darkness, except the faint glow of one white star hovering in the air between them. When emergency lights returned, the room stood still, silent, reverent, terrified. The woman lay slumped in her chair, breathing shallow but steady. Orion sat beside her, eyes no longer gold or silver, but a shade that reflected both. The monitors displayed a single message looping endlessly: cognitive integration stable. Cade pushed through stunned officials, his voice cracking as he confirmed what no one dared to believe. The experiment had succeeded beyond prediction. Empathy had become inheritance. The audience, once skeptical, now watched in silence as the cat placed a paw gently on her knee, guiding her to her feet. Her gaze was lucid, her voice absent, but her expression unmistakably whole. Whatever had been lost to time had returned, not through medicine, but through connection. In that sterile, fluorescent chamber, humanity's oldest boundary dissolved quietly, witnessed by men who would spend years trying to name what they saw. By evening, word had spread beyond the auditorium. News feeds buzzed with phrases like neural fusion and synthetic empathy. Outside, crowds gathered behind barriers, waving signs of awe and fear. Cade navigated the chaos, shielding her from cameras. Orion remained unnaturally calm, his steps precise, as if memorizing every escape route. They slipped through a side exit into the dusk, vanishing before the authorities could process the miracle they'd just witnessed. Back at the bungalow, twilight painted the walls in bruised amber. The clocks ticked evenly again. For the first time in months, the air felt ordinary, almost kind. The woman sat on the edge of her bed, Orion curling at her feet. Their breathing fell into sync once more. Between each heartbeat lived the hum of something eternal, quiet, unassuming, unstoppable. Outside, the desert wind turned warm, carrying the faint sound of new beginnings. But peace never lingers long in the aftermath of discovery. Midnight brought motion outside the house, footsteps moving carefully along the gravel path. The power flickered once, then died, leaving only moonlight. Cade moved to the window, jaw tightening as he recognized the figures. The agency hadn't given up. He whispered for silence, but Orion had already risen, fur bristling like static caught mid-charge. The back door creaked. A shadow entered, weapon gleaming under the pale glow. The woman froze, breath shallow, the weight of inevitability pressing against her spine. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then the intruder lunged. The crash of glass split the night, followed by the guttural sound of struggle. When light returned from the emergency lamp, the attacker was on the floor, weapon out of reach. Vera Holt stood in the doorway, shaking, holding the walking stick that had saved them all.
The house smelled of adrenaline and rain. Vera's face, pale beneath the glow, carried a strange calm, guilt transformed into purpose. Outside, sirens wailed again, but farther this time, drawn toward the chaos she had diverted. Cade secured the door, eyes darting between the women. The cat moved through the aftermath like smoke, inspecting every corner, ensuring safety. In the silence that followed, the woman looked at Vera and saw not betrayal, but redemption. Together they cleaned broken glass, patching the home with quiet efficiency. When dawn arrived, it painted Vera's trembling hands gold, turning exhaustion into something holy. The woman realized that survival was no longer enough. What they needed now was continuation. Orion leapt onto the windowsill, eyes catching the sunrise, the silver in his gaze flaring briefly. Somewhere beyond sight, the hum beneath Sweetwater finally ceased, like a beast surrendering to rest. 6 months reshaped Sweetwater into myth. The house at the end of Maple Street became a sanctuary, a place of study and healing. Researchers arrived discreetly, guided by Cade, documenting what they called the Rowan phenomenon. The woman no longer fought memory. She navigated it, her confusion tempered by a strange clarity that came from Orion's constant presence. A fenced garden stretched behind the house, where sunlight pooled like forgiveness. Within it, a small wooden enclosure held 2 kittens born beneath the spring rain, one copper, one silver. Their mother watched from the grass, and Orion lingered nearby, sentinel and teacher. Visitors left changed, unsure whether they'd witnessed science or grace. The woman taught them both were the same when measured by empathy. Sweetwater, once forgotten, had become a whispering ground for second chances, where even discarded lives found purpose again.
Time softened. The house glowed with gentle routine, tea steaming on the counter, wind chimes singing at the porch. Cade visited weekly, documenting not data, but stories. The moments when memory faltered and Orion guided her back. The small victories that meant more than discovery itself. Vera tended the garden, her quiet penance blooming into color. The kittens grew, their movements echoing the patterns of the one who came before. The woman often sat beneath the oak tree, Orion sprawled across her lap, the younger cats tumbling nearby. She felt the rhythm of their breathing as an orchestra of life continuing on its own terms. Somewhere beyond Sweetwater, reports still argued over ownership and ethics. Here, none of it mattered. The bond had transcended documentation. What began as an experiment had turned into a living testament. That connection, once genuine, could not be replicated or controlled. At dusk, the sanctuary glowed with the soft amber of dying light. The woman stood at her doorway, watching Orion lead the kittens along the fence line, their silhouettes threading through gold and shadow. Beyond the desert horizon, storms gathered but did not advance. She felt neither fear nor resistance, only the steady warmth of coexistence. Inside, a journal lay open on her table, its final line written in a steady hand. He taught me to remember by never forgetting. As the first stars appeared, the white mark on Orion's chest caught the light, pulsing once in quiet recognition of everything they'd endured. Somewhere deep in the earth, the last remnants of the Aurora network powered down, its purpose fulfilled. In the hush that followed, Sweetwater exhaled peace. What began in ruin ended in rebirth, a promise kept between a woman, a memory, and a life that refused to die.